to another episode of the CoVerse podcast, part of the Insurance Nerds Network, where we'll be shining light on the best stories and storytellers in the industry. My name is Sarah Abdelwahed, and I'm joined with a very special guest, Andrea Wise. Andrea, it's great to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Could you start by telling us a bit about your background and what led you to your work at Uninterrupted Performance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in the health and wellness industry for over 20 years. Lots of different experience working with executives, working with athletes, working in the corporate space. And essentially, Uninterrupted Performance, a handful of us came together to essentially bring health and wellness to the corporate space, also working with athletes. There's a lot of similarities when you're talking about executives and athletes. And so really trying to bridge the gap in terms of all the health and wellness needs when it comes to overall performance.
Got it. And in your experience, what do you see, what influenced your passion for addressing wellness in the corporate environment?
Yeah. So after working in the corporate space for a really long time with a bunch of different executives and also the juxtaposition of working with athletes for so long, it's really interesting to see how similar things are, right? When you're talking about being able to perform in the boardroom, and also athletes needing to perform on the field or the court, all of the same things take into consideration what happens in their performance, right? Sleep hygiene, stress management, workload, travel schedule, personal things, nutrition. It's all the same, right? And we're all talking about how we can perform and how we can essentially be our absolute best, both personally and professionally. And that's one thing that I think is really, really important and can really be managed and impacted by the choices that we make on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's such a great observation. A lot of people don't think about how when you're looking at athletes and your work, like burnout and wellness is the same. Everyone needs to focus on the same types of things, so they kind of come hand in hand. So that's a great point to bring about. Um, so one of the aspects that you focus on is also burnout in the corporate world, and we know that's been such a prevalent issue, especially nowadays where we see layoffs all the time and people are just really exhausted in the field that they're working in. How would you describe the current state of burnout, not only in the insurance industry, but just the corporate world right now?
It's pretty high, right? I work with a lot of different entrepreneurs as well. And when you're talking about burnout, it's it really happens for a lot of different reasons. But the off switch essentially never goes off, right? When you think about your car, right? When you drive a car, you have to rotate the tires, you have to get an oil change, you have to stop and put gas in it, right? And then at a certain level, there needs to be an overhaul and a larger service, right? We as humans are not robots, right? We are not meant to be on 24/7 for, days and days, months and months, weeks and weeks. And especially when we're talking about the corporate space and women and men alike, not only do you have the responsibility in the workplace, but then you also have whatever responsibilities you have at home. Okay. And so you oftentimes are not getting any kind of break because you're going from one responsibility in the workplace and maybe it's super, super demanding. And, there's people that are working 12, 14, 16 hours, but then they still have to do things at home. And
Yep.
we ultimately still need to be able to eat, sleep, shower, and, do something besides work. And that kind of that cycle just goes and goes and goes until the wheels come off and it's like, I can't do this anymore.
That is so true. I think we're all guilty of that at some point, and it's so hard to turn that off. And what would you say, what advice would you give to people who are in that situation and they just can't turn off?
So that's a tough one, right? Because everyone is a little bit different, right? So the things that we try and help people with vary slightly depending on the person, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes it's easier to talk to people about their sleep hygiene, right? And that's the first domino that we can kind of get to fall to
Mhm.
help things across the board, right? Sleep is the only time that our body can truly regenerate, right?
Mhm.
And it's really, really important to our function. Whereas other people sometimes we can focus more on movement, right? And help having movement be something to help give your brain and body a break and re-energize you. So there's a lot of different ways that we can approach it. It just really depends on what's going to have the largest impact on you as an individual at this given time.
That makes sense. Everyone has such different lifestyles, so it varies depending on the individual themselves. Um, in your in your experience, what factors do you think contribute the most to high levels of stress and burnout, not only in the insurance sector, but in other industries as well? Or you can say, I know specifically in the insurance industry, it may be high level, especially in claims and, the customer service aspect of it. Um, what would you say from your experience that you've seen?
So I think it goes back to that constantly on piece, right? And so that was one of the reasons why at one of the last insurance conferences that I spoke and presented at, we did a breathwork experience. And that's one of the things that I love teaching and talking about because we have to breathe all day, every day, right? It's something that a lot of us don't necessarily think about, but it's the one thing that you can always control. And when you get to learn a little bit more about your breath and how you can use it, it can really help you down regulate your central nervous system and kind of de-stress in the moment, right? So there's different tools and different breath patterns that I teach and talk about to be able to give you, to empower you to be able to do that at any point in time when you start to feel stressed, right?
Mhm.
And you could do it, you could be doing it right during this Zoom call. And if you were, feeling really stressed about something that we were talking about, you could, breathe and take care of yourself, so to speak. And so that's one of the things that I really like to impart and share with people
Okay.
because we're always under a lot of stress, right? But
Mhm.
the simple awareness of recognizing that we're one feeling stress and then being able to have something to immediately be able to do as a tool can be really empowering.
Oh, I love that. You'll have to share one of those breathing exercises at the end if we have time. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Um, and then so working at Uninterrupted Performance, what are some of the key wellness solutions that you guys offer to combat burnout?
So, a few of the things that we do are experiences, right? So, we can come in if there was an offsite and speak and kind of take a group of people through an experience to, again, teach them some different tools, whether it's on the breathwork front, on the movement, around stress management, nutrition. There's all these different topics that we can cover that will resonate with people in different ways. So that's one of the ways that we love working with individuals or corporations or groups, right? Is just coming in and being able to teach and educate and actually give someone an experience. The other thing that we often do is we will come in and help provide different solutions on the corporate wellness side. So
Mhm.
we can come in and do a full-fledged kind of overhaul of what's being offered on a monthly basis, what employees have access to, and what that really looks like to, again, be able to give people tools, support,
Mhm.
and accountability. And this can happen for people, whether it's in person and or virtual, right? A lot of times companies are doing this hybrid model. So
Mhm.
being able to have some in-office tools depending on what's available to them, but then also being able to provide different things from an app or virtually like this is really, really nice to be able to check the box that we're kind of offering different things for different people depending on what's available in office virtually, or even just being able to work with different budgets.
Yeah, I think that's also really important because having a hybrid model, some people do prefer, doing things in person as opposed to
Mhm.
always doing things virtually. So I think that's a great thing that you guys offer because I know some places will just be only virtual or only in person. So offering both is really good and makes it more accessible for people. Um, and going off of that, can you share with us a success story where your wellness intervention significantly improved someone's work-life balance?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one client that comes to mind who was always feeling super rushed, kind of, they felt like they were always running out of time, didn't do very well with stress, and really wasn't very flexible, right? When you don't have control over everything, someone who is super rigid, right, that can cause additional anxiety and whatnot because you don't have control over everything. So we started doing breath work on a weekly basis in addition to a movement practice and then some additional pieces of homework, really simple kind of meditation practices that were guided and a few other things. And it was really, really fascinating to see the change in this person, just in terms of overall kind of like happiness and joy and just energetically, feeling better when they were interacting with
Mhm.
people, feeling less stressed
Yeah.
during situations where things were kind of like happening out of their control. And then just an increase in their overall performance and well-being was really, really cool to see.
Yeah, so that just shows that how much of an impact just taking the time and doing these simple exercises can have on someone's overall mental health state. So,
Mhm.
would you say, so when someone reaches out to you, are they typically at their most stressful level? Um, what would you recommend? Would you recommend that people, if would you recommend that they look into these types of services obviously before they reach burnout? Or coming from you, what would you say your recommendation would be?
So it's interesting because we are definitely people who take a proactive approach,
Mhm.
right? I think anytime that you can be proactive around a situation, it's always going to be better as opposed to having, a reactive moment when you're kind of already backed in a corner. But the whole notion of burnout, people don't necessarily have the awareness to understand that it's happening, right? Which is part
Mhm.
of part of the problem, unless someone else brings it to their attention, or unless they maybe get that break and can kind of zoom out and say, oh, okay, I didn't realize how out of control this situation has gotten. Um, but when people can do that, it's obviously better. But there are so many people that end up kind of coming to us, or that I've encountered recently, who have really just kind of like hit that wall, and they're like,
Mhm.
okay, I need to take a leave of absence. I need to go
Mhm.
on a sabbatical, or something, because it's just gotten to the point where they're, unhappy, not well, not themselves anymore. And they're
Mhm.
like, okay, I can't now try and manage this while I'm doing all of these other things, because they're just so far gone,
Yeah.
so far behind the eight ball, that they really need to just like take a clean kind of like break to
Mhm.
pour back into themselves so that they can make themselves better. I always say you can't pour from an empty cup,
Yeah.
right? And so if you've gotten to that point where your cup is just really empty and it's been that way for a very, very
Mhm.
long time, then, sometimes hopefully you have the ability to kind of like take a pause and a break so that you can reevaluate and, change some things about you.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to realize because you cannot just keep pushing yourself to a point where you're just not going to be able to handle it anymore, and it just really
Mhm.
affects your overall state of well-being. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just your mental well-being is just as important as your physical state. And when it
Mhm.
gets to that point, you're giving your body so much anxiety and duress. So I think going off of that, when someone is getting to that point or has really high stress, what advice would you give to someone who is experiencing that? What steps should they take?
Uh, anything that they can do to essentially take some kind of pause or break, but I really advocate them reaching out to someone, right? Um, whether it's a colleague or a family member or some kind of professional help, because you didn't you didn't get to this place just, overnight, and you typically need support in order to get yourself out of it, right? Just kind of taking a pause and then coming back isn't going to solve anything because you haven't changed, right? You haven't changed
Right.
anything. So it's
Yeah.
it's really about being able to get some support to talk through and work through some of your habits, some of your behaviors, your patterns, right? Even
Mhm.
your thinking patterns, right? And some of those things, because that's really what gets you to that state of burnout,
Mhm.
because there's like self-inflicted pressure, or maybe you feel guilty, or maybe you're a people pleaser, right?
Yeah.
Or some of these different tendencies. And until you really zoom out and really take a look at, okay, how did I end up there?
Right.
Right? You're just going to continue those patterns and behaviors over and over.
That's so true. And I think it's so important for people. Like, I know a lot of people are worried to ask for help, or they don't want to be a burden, but sometimes it's just what you need to do, and it's more helpful than not, because you can't always help yourself. You might need, the accountability or the help that someone else might give you, especially if you can't see, what's going on. You need an outsider's perspective, like, if it's your partner, your spouse, your friends who you see and they know you well, and they're like, this is not typically how you act, like you are undergoing a lot of stress, and they can tell you that, and just have a open conversation about it. That can be so helpful. And just having someone also to vent to, that just talking about it helps. And I think that's such an important thing to also highlight, because it's okay to ask for help and support when you need it. um so
Absolutely.
and then, so going into that, I know a lot has to do with, you know, workplace and how they, support what mental well-being. How can organizations create a culture that prioritizes employee wellness and prevents burnout?
Hmm. I was talking about this with a few different people at the last insurance conference that
Hmm.
I was at. And the culture of a company and leadership from the top down really impacts what happens in the company, right?
Hmm.
So if we're working
Yeah.
with a company who really prioritizes mental well-being, overall health and wellness, and really understands that the better place physically, mentally, spiritually their employees are in, and the more tools and whatnot that they have access to, the better their performance is going to be. They're going to actually want to come to work.
Mhm.
They're going to want to do well, right? People are going to get along better. There won't be as many kind of dramatic in office dynamics and whatnot. So it really starts from the top down. Yes, of course, money matters. The bottom line matters. But I
Yeah,
think if the companies that really advocate for and prioritize employee, happiness and well-being from the top down, then the employees don't feel like they can't speak up
right,
about needing to take time or going through something that is maybe extra stressful, maybe not to do so much with work, but on the personal side, but if I'm working in a place and I feel like I have to keep what's happening in my personal life a secret, or, continuously act like everything's okay, or I'm going to be penalized if I ask for, help, then that doesn't make it a good place to work long term for
right,
people. So the culture really matters. And I really see a difference in companies where those um, that emphasis and whatnot happens from the top down.
oh yeah, yeah, I think that's so true, because if you're happy at your company, you're going to want to stay there too. So
Yeah.
it affects turnover rate a lot as well. So just
Hmm.
being happy where you work, being able to speak up, taking the time you need off, those things are really important, and they address a lot of the burnout issues. Um,
Hmm.
do you think there are any ways companies can stay ahead of the curve in terms of implementing wellness initiatives?
So I have seen companies that are more progressive in terms of a consistent offering for their employees. It is definitely better. So companies who say on a monthly basis have different lunch and learns or different topics,
Mhm.
or again, simply just providing access to something that's actually going to help and support someone, not providing something just to check a box to say that you're providing it, but actually providing something that's legitimate that people can start to use. Because then that way, when there are times of higher stress, right? Because things typically happen in seasons. Insurance is a little bit different, right? Because you guys are there when, bad things happen. And so, from a weather perspective or car accidents or different things,
Mhm.
right? We don't want any of those things to happen, but they do, right? That's why people have insurance. But being able to understand and know, okay, this is a slower time for me, so I'm going to, work on these things, or I'm going to prioritize this. Or I know that maybe if you're a leader for a team
Mhm.
and you can say, okay, we're going into this really hectic season, I'm going to make sure that beforehand I prioritize some of these other things for my team, so it's on the forefront of their mind, right? So that they can you know feel supported, so that they have more things in order. Just doing those little things really make a difference.
Yeah, I think those are great tips to share. Is there any additional advice or insight you'd like to share with our listeners about managing stress and just preventing burnout overall?
So open communication and dialogue are a big one for me. Sometimes we can't always articulate what it is that's going on, but if there is some kind of, regular check-in, or like I said, the ability and the comfortability to have open communication and dialogue around what's working, what's not working, you know, saying I need help, or I need additional support in these areas. oftentimes can mitigate something catastrophic happening because, again, we're being proactive in getting to it, addressing it, or at least making aware, bringing awareness to a situation so that way we can then problem solve and come up with a solution, as opposed to not saying anything and then it just goes and goes and goes, and then
Yes.
we're reactive, right? Because something
Mhm.
blows up. So those are some big ones.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Those are great points. Um, so as we close out, if you would love to share one of the breathing exercises with our listeners and viewers, that would be great. So take us through the steps of what someone would need to do.
Absolutely. Okay, so the most kind of bang for your buck that you can get is going to be the physiological sigh. So what you're going to do is you're going to take an inhale, and then you're going to take another inhale, and then you're going to exhale, and just kind of let you want to make an audible sound. So you want
Yeah.
to let your voice kind of vibrate. It actually, the vibration in the massage is really, really great to help down regulate your central nervous system and to help kind of signal to your body that it's okay to relax. So if you can kind of do like 3 of those. So we take a
Okay.
big breath in, take another breath in, and then just let yourself sigh. Yep.
Yeah.
And you just kind of do 2 or 3 of
Hmm.
those, and you want to try and just let your exhale be a little longer than your inhale. And that's a great way to just pattern interrupt and signal to
Yeah.
your body that it's okay to relax.
And that's such an easy thing to do throughout your day, especially when you feel really stressed out or you're working on a project or something. Just take like 1 or 2 minutes, do a quick breathing exercise, and you'll feel a little bit better. Like I already
Yeah.
felt a little bit better just doing the one. I'm like, oh, that
Yeah.
feels good. I need to
Yeah.
do more of that.
Absolutely. I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing all your valuable insights on burnout and wellness. Um, the work you're doing is great and truly inspiring. And it's amazing how much this helps people. So, for our listeners who want to learn more about Andrea's work and wellness solutions offered by Uninterrupted Performance, please be sure to visit their website or connect with Andrea on LinkedIn. Thank you again so much for your time today, and to all our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, take care and stay well.
Thanks, Sarah.